I am Ethan, 29 years old. Just last month, my own flesh and blood abandoned me at a Paris airport, actively setting me up to be arrested by armed French guards for carrying a stolen passport. While I was completely surrounded by police screaming commands I could not understand, my parents and my older brother Julian did not even look back at me. They walked right down the jet bridge, leaving me stranded in a foreign country so they could legally steal my $2.5 million inheritance. They genuinely thought they had broken me. They thought I would be sitting in a dirty holding cell, completely helpless, crying, and utterly destroyed. But there is one major thing they did not know. A venture capitalist billionaire happened to be sitting right across from me in that very detention room, and he had a private jet, an army of ruthless corporate lawyers, and a brilliant plan for revenge. And right now, my family is facing serious federal prison time. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed their lives and took back what was rightfully mine, hit that like button if you believe in absolute justice. And please do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Now, let us go back to where this entire nightmare began. The family vacation to Europe was supposed to be a celebration. It was my mother Sylvia's idea, claiming we needed family bonding time before my grandmother's trust fund matured. I should have known better. I should have seen the red flags when my father Walter suddenly acted interested in my career, or when my brother Julian, the golden child who never worked a hard day in his entire life, insisted on carrying my heavy bags through the cobblestone streets of Rome. We were finally at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, getting ready to board our long flight back to New York. The international terminal was packed, noisy, and chaotic. "Oh, honey, didn't you check your bag? You don't have a ticket anymore." That was the absolute last thing my mother said to me before she turned her back and boarded the plane home, intentionally leaving me stranded at the gate. She scanned 3 boarding passes with the gate agent. Hers, my father's, and my brother Julian's. Mine was mysteriously gone. Panicked, I tried to grab her arm to ask what was going on, but Julian stepped in. He shoved me hard, a deliberate, aggressive push. In the confusion of the sudden physical collision, he swiftly slipped a black passport directly into my open tote bag. Seconds later, as I stumbled backward toward the security checkpoint, the alarm screamed. It was deafening. Armed French police swarmed me instantly, shouting harsh commands I completely didn't understand. They grabbed my arms, pinning them tightly behind my back. I looked back at the gate, desperately begging for my family's help. My family wasn't panicking. They weren't crying. They were just walking down the jet bridge, leaving me to be arrested in a foreign country with a stolen passport planted in my bag. The next hour was a terrifying blur of aggressive physical searches, cold metal handcuffs, and sheer, paralyzing disbelief. I sat heavily in a glass-walled detention room that smelled intensely like industrial cleaner and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare on the bolted metal table. Most people in this situation would be crying. Most people would be screaming for a lawyer or begging the stone-faced guard standing by the door for a single phone call to their embassy. But I didn't cry. I calculated. I am a forensic accountant by trade. My entire job, the way I earn my salary, is to look at a massive, tangled mess of numbers and find the exact story that someone is desperately trying to hide. I track hidden assets in messy divorce cases. I audit massive real estate portfolios. I find the absolute truth when liars try to bury it. So, I looked at my current situation exactly like a complex balance sheet. Item 1. My mother deliberately distracted me and took my real passport while I was looking away. Item 2. My brother Julian planted a stolen passport in my bag during that calculated physical shove. Item 3. I overheard the guards say this specific passport was reported lost yesterday, which meant a mandatory 48-hour identity hold while French authorities rigorously verified who I actually was. Why exactly 48 hours? Then it clicked. The realization hit me harder than the cold metal chair I was sitting on. My grandmother's trust fund. $2,500,000. It was officially set to mature tomorrow at exactly noon. There was a specific, obscure clause buried deep in the fine print of that massive legal document. The absentee clause. It stated very clearly that if the primary beneficiary couldn't be located or contacted within 24 hours of the maturity date, administrative control temporarily reverted to the next of kin. My parents. They didn't just want to ruin my European vacation. They desperately needed me to vanish from the face of the earth for exactly 2 days so they could legally steal $2.5 million. It was brilliant in its cruelty. It was pure evil. And I was trapped in a glass box while they were probably ordering expensive champagne in first class on their way back to the States. The heavy metal door buzzed loudly and swung open. I fully expected a French detective to come in and formally charge me with international fraud. Instead, a man walked in who looked like he owned the entire airport. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that easily cost more than my car, and he moved with the kind of predatory grace you usually see in sharks or high-level investment bankers. He didn't sit down. He stood by the door, studying me intently like I was a column of figures he couldn't quite get to add up. "Ethan Miller," he said. His voice was incredibly low, completely devoid of any human sympathy. "Top of your class at Wharton, specialized in forensic audits for distressed assets. You have quite a reputation for finding money that doesn't want to be found." I straightened my spine, absolutely refusing to look weak or broken. "Who are you?" "Sebastian," he replied smoothly. "I run a venture capital firm in New York. We have a mutual problem. My problem is a stolen passport and a family that just intentionally framed me," I said flatly. "What is yours?" "My problem is a massive corporate merger happening in exactly 3 days. I have a business partner who is skimming off the top. But he is good. Too good. My regular auditors can't find the leak." He casually checked a watch that probably cost more than most people's retirement accounts. "I need someone who isn't on the official payroll. Someone desperate enough to work fast and quiet." He casually tossed a thick file onto the metal table. It wasn't my police file. It was a massive corporate contract. "I have influential friends at the embassy. I can have you walked out of here in 20 minutes classified as a diplomatic consultant. You get on my jet. You fly back to New York with me. You find my missing money. And in return?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "In return, you get your freedom. You get back to New York before your grandmother's trust fund deadline passes. And I personally pay you $20,000 for the job." I looked at him closely. This wasn't a rescue mission. He didn't care about my feelings or my family trauma. He saw a highly skilled resource he could exploit for his own gain. Honestly, it was the most respectful and honest offer I had received in years. "Make it 30,000, I said without blinking. "And you cover my legal fees if my family tries to contest the will or drag me into a lawsuit." Sebastian smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the calculating smile of a ruthless man who just closed a highly profitable deal. "Done." I stood up. I didn't look back at the confused guard or the glass box that was supposed to be my cage. I walked out of that room not as a victim but as a strategic partner. My family genuinely thought they had discarded me like garbage. They didn't realize they had just pushed me directly into the big leagues. I thought the absolute worst of the betrayal was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The cabin of Sebastian's private jet was quieter than a local library and much colder than a morgue. We were flying thousands of feet above the dark Atlantic Ocean. He sat across from me, intensely reviewing a complex merger agreement, while I stared blindly at the massive dossier his elite security team had already compiled on my family. Their speed and efficiency were terrifyingly impressive. In less than an hour, they had pulled bank records, private emails, and the full, unredacted legal text of my grandmother's trust. I flipped straight to page 4. There it was, printed in stark black and white. The absentee clause. In the event the primary beneficiary cannot be located or is deemed legally incapacitated 48 hours prior to disbursement, administrative power transfers to the secondary guardians. My parents. They didn't just want the money to pay off some overdue credit cards. They wanted the absolute power to spend it without any oversight. I looked out the small window at the dark ocean below. I knew I should have been heartbroken. I should have been mourning the sudden, violent loss of the family I thought I had. But as I read the legal fine print over and over, the sadness just evaporated completely. In its place, a cold, hard, unyielding rage began to settle deep in my chest, because the bitter truth was, this wasn't the first time they had done something like this. The memories started hitting me like physical blows. These weren't vague feelings of childhood neglect. These were specific, itemized receipts of every single time I had bankrolled their dysfunction and sacrificed my own life for theirs. I clearly remembered being 22 years old. I had just saved enough money from working double shifts at a terrible retail job to buy my very first car, a reliable used Honda Civic. I was so incredibly proud of it. It meant freedom. It meant I could finally drive to a better-paying job instead of taking a 2-hour bus ride in the freezing rain. 2 days after I brought it home, my father Walter sat me down at the kitchen table. He wasn't angry or demanding. He was absolutely pathetic. He was crying uncontrollably. He confessed that he owed $30,000 to a violent bookie who was actively threatening to break his legs if he didn't pay up by the end of the week. "You're the responsible one, Ethan," he had said to me, gripping my hands with his sweaty palms. "You can fix this. You always fix this." I sold the car the very next morning. I took a massive financial loss on it, but I wired the cash directly to the bookie to save his miserable life. My father didn't thank me. He never apologized for taking my hard-earned money. He just casually asked me for a ride to the dog track the very next weekend, acting like nothing had ever happened. I turned the page of the dossier. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I remembered the prestigious scholarship to Wharton. It was a full ride. My one golden ticket out of that toxic household. It was my chance to build a real future. But my older brother Julian, the absolute golden child of the family, had just gone through a messy breakup. My mother Sylvia insisted that Julian was deeply traumatized and desperately needed a mental health year in Italy to recover and find himself. They absolutely couldn't afford to send him. Unless, "Ethan, you can just take out student loans," my mother had said to me. Her voice was so entirely reasonable, so calm, as if she were simply asking me to pass the salt at a Thanksgiving dinner. "Julian is fragile. He needs this cultural experience. You're strong. You can handle the debt." My Aunt Martha, who always played the role of the sweet peacemaker at family gatherings, had chimed in. "Ethan, family is everything. Your brother will pay you back when he finds his footing. Don't be selfish with your college fund." I gave up the Wharton scholarship money so my grown brother could eat expensive gelato in Florence while I worked the brutal graveyard shift at a local data center just to pay my community college tuition. For years, I told myself this was what true love looked like. I told myself that being called the strong one was a genuine compliment. I was completely wrong. It was just a highly effective tool they used to keep me compliant. I looked over at Sebastian, who was silently watching me over the gold rim of his espresso cup. "You realize what you are to them, don't you?" he asked quietly, his voice cutting through the hum of the jet engines. "Yes," I said, staring at the financial records that detailed their endless debts. "I'm not a son. I'm an insurance policy." They had spent 29 years carefully training me to be highly competent. Not so I could succeed and build my own life, but so I could always be there to clean up their disastrous messes. They groomed me to be the perfect fixer, the ultimate reliable safety net. And now that the big $2.5 million payout was finally coming, they were cashing me out completely. They genuinely thought they had broken me at that Paris airport. They thought stripping me of my passport, my phone, and my dignity would leave me entirely helpless. But they forgot one crucial thing. They were the exact people who taught me how to survive without any resources. They were the ones who forced me to become a ruthless shark just to keep my head above water in their sea of chaos. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out the high-end laptop Sebastian had provided for me. "What are you doing?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I opened a blank, secure document. "I'm drafting an incorporation agreement for a shell company," I said, my fingers flying across the backlit keys with practiced speed. "They want a quick, massive payout. I'm going to give them an opportunity they absolutely can't refuse." "You're going to trap them?" Sebastian stated. It wasn't a question. It was a recognition of a fellow predator. They trained me to fix their messes, I said, staring hard at the cursor blinking on the bright white screen. Now, I'm going to fix them permanently. I thought I understood the depths of their depravity. But I had not yet seen what my brother was doing on social media while I was locked in a cage. We landed safely at Teterboro Airport just as the early morning sun was bleeding over the iconic New York City skyline. Sebastian's private driver was waiting right on the tarmac next to a sleek, black Rolls-Royce. There were no long customs lines, no tedious questions from border agents. Having extreme wealth doesn't just buy expensive things. It buys you incredible shortcuts through life's biggest obstacles. 30 minutes later, I was sitting dead center in the war room of Sebastian's sprawling penthouse in Tribeca. It was a stunning fortress of floor-to-ceiling glass and cold steel, completely detached from the chaotic mess my personal life had suddenly become. Before doing anything else for myself, I honored my contract. I spent the next 2 hours digging deep into Sebastian's corporate accounts. Using advanced forensic accounting software, I traced a complex web of dummy invoices and offshore transfers. I found his missing funds and handed him the undeniable proof of his partner's embezzlement before my coffee even got cold. I held up my end of the bargain. Now, I had his full technological arsenal at my disposal. My security team has successfully set up a complete mirror of your personal cloud accounts, Sebastian said, smoothly sliding a sleek tablet across the polished mahogany table toward me. You might want to brace yourself. I didn't brace. I just tapped the glowing screen. Physically, I was free and safe in a billionaire's penthouse, but digitally, I was already a dead man. My brother Julian had been very, very busy while I was flying over the ocean. The very first thing that popped up was his Instagram story posted just 6 hours ago. It was a carefully staged selfie of him looking tear-eyed and deeply distressed in a VIP airport lounge, captioning a stark black screen. "Please pray for my brother Ethan," the text read. "He had a severe mental breakdown at the airport in Paris. We are doing everything we can to get him professional help. Please respect our privacy during this crisis." I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. It was an absolute masterclass in public character assassination. By publicly framing my sudden disappearance as a severe mental health crisis, he wasn't just explaining away my absence to our friends and family. He was systematically discrediting any accusation I might make against them later. If I somehow made it back and screamed fraud or theft, he would just nod sadly to the police and say, "See? He's paranoid. He's sick." But the social media circus was just a smokescreen for the real attack. The true, devastating damage was waiting for me in my mirrored email inbox. My mother, Sylvia, had sent a high-priority, urgent message directly to Chloe, the executive director of the trust fund. This was the woman who had hugged me at my grandmother's funeral, promising to protect my interests. Subject line: emergency guardianship, disbursement of funds. Attached to the email was a highly official-looking scanned document. It was a translated police incident report from Charles de Gaulle Airport, officially citing me for a severe security breach and erratic behavior. As you can clearly see from the attached documentation, my mother wrote in the email, "Ethan is currently incarcerated and mentally unfit to manage his affairs. Per the absentee clause, we are invoking our right as secondary guardians to secure the assets before he causes further harm to himself." They weren't just quietly stealing the money. They were actively nuking my entire professional reputation to ensure they got away with it. I am a forensic accountant, a financial professional who is publicly labeled as mentally unstable and incarcerated is entirely unemployable. They were making absolutely sure that even if I somehow managed to get out of France, I would have nothing left to go back to. No career, no promotion, no salary, no credibility. I felt a sudden, cold shiver run violently down my spine. It wasn't fear. It was total, absolute clarity. They truly, deeply believed I was helpless. They thought I was sitting on a concrete floor in a French holding cell, crying into my dirty hands, desperately waiting for them to eventually show mercy and save me. They had absolutely no idea I was sitting comfortably in a multi-million-dollar penthouse in Tribeca, actively watching their every single move in high definition. They're thorough, Sebastian noted quietly, reading the damning emails right over my shoulder. They've effectively blocked you from contesting the transfer without a lengthy legal battle. By the time a judge actually hears you, the money will be gone. They don't want a drawn-out legal battle, I said, my eyes completely fixed on the glowing screen. They want a fast, quiet payout. They have enormous debts. Real debts. The kind you can't pay with a monthly payment plan. I stood up abruptly and walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window. Down below, the city of New York was just waking up. Yellow cabs moved like ants on the gray pavement. Somewhere in this very city, my parents and my brother were probably celebrating with expensive dinners. They were already counting chickens that hadn't hatched yet. They think the only possible way to get that money is directly through the trust executive, I said, turning back to face Sebastian. They're thinking small. Sebastian raised an intrigued eyebrow. What is the play here, Ethan? I need immediate access to your capital reserves. Not to actually spend, just to show proof of funds. I'm going to become the exact answer to their desperate prayers, I said, my voice dangerously calm. They need raw cash fast before their creditors break their legs. I'm going to offer them a deal so incredibly good, so unbelievably tempting, that they'll eagerly sign their own death warrants just to touch it. They wanted to play games with legal documents and custody laws. I was about to introduce them to the brutal reality of corporate warfare. It took less than 1 hour to meticulously build the cage. Using Sebastian's extensive corporate infrastructure, his legal connections, and his powerful servers, we brought a ghost company to life. We created Atlas Holdings, framing it as a highly exclusive, boutique investment firm specializing in aggressive distressed asset acquisition. It was a masterpiece of corporate illusion. It had a sleek, professional website, a legitimate Delaware business registration, and an ironclad verifiable proof of funds document showing exactly $50 million in liquid capital. To anyone drowning in severe debt, Atlas Holdings looked like pure, miraculous salvation. In reality, it was a perfectly sharpened guillotine waiting to drop. My parents are drowning, I told Sebastian, pulling up their comprehensive credit report on the main massive screen in the war room. I pointed to the glowing red numbers on the monitor. They currently have 3 separate, high-interest mortgages. Their credit cards are completely maxed out to the limit. And if my father Walter's gambling habits haven't magically changed since I last bailed him out, he definitely owes serious money to people who don't bother sending polite late notices in the mail. So we offer them a sudden lifeline, Sebastian said, catching on immediately, a dark amusement in his eyes. We offer them a bridge loan. I corrected him. A very high-interest, short-term, immediate payout bridge loan. We offer to swoop in and buy out all of their bad debt for pennies on the dollar. But to do that, we require massive collateral. The trust fund. Exactly, Sebastian finished, leaning forward. But since the trust is still technically legally in my name, Atlas Holdings absolutely cannot accept it as collateral unless the current guardians swear under federal oath that the primary beneficiary is legally incapacitated. Sebastian let out a low chuckle, a truly shark-like grin spreading across his face. Perjury. Perjury, I confirmed. Wire fraud and massive bank fraud. The ultimate federal trifecta. We didn't make the phone call ourselves. That would be far too risky, and my father might recognize my voice, even disguised over a bad connection. Sebastian immediately brought in Marcus Thorne, a ruthless corporate attorney who specialized in devastating hostile takeovers. Marcus had a deep, intimidating voice that sounded like crushed gravel tightly wrapped in expensive silk. He sounded exactly like the kind of powerful man who made huge problems disappear for a very high price. We sat silently in the war room, listening intently on the high-fidelity speakerphone as Marcus dialed my father's personal cell number. It rang twice. Hello. Walter's voice came through. It was tight, defensive, and deeply anxious. He was probably terrified, expecting a vicious debt collector, or maybe someone from the HOA complaining about unpaid dues. Mr. Miller, this is Marcus Thorne, legal counsel representing Atlas Holdings. Marcus stated, projecting absolute, unwavering authority. We have recently acquired a large portfolio of distressed liabilities that unfortunately includes your outstanding promissory notes. We are looking to liquidate these positions immediately. I closely watched the audio waveform spike and flatline on the large monitor. My father was dead silent on the other end. He was terrified. I don't have the liquid cash right now, Walter finally stammered, his voice trembling. We are currently waiting on a large family trust disbursement, but there are some unexpected administrative delays. Delays make my partners extremely nervous, Mr. Miller, Marcus said, his tone perfectly bored and dangerously impatient. However, Atlas Holdings is occasionally willing to consolidate your type of severe debt into a single, clean bridge loan, heavily secured against that trust. We can wire the full funds to your account this very afternoon, clearing your ledgers completely. But we must close the file today. Non-negotiable. Today, Walter's voice cracked, a mix of sheer panic and sudden, overwhelming hope. Yes, we can absolutely do today. Excellent, Marcus continued smoothly. There is just one minor compliance issue. Our internal due diligence shows the trust is legally in your son's name. For us to legally accept it as collateral, we need absolute legal assurance that you have sole administrative authority to encumber these assets. I held my breath. I gripped the edge of the mahogany table until my knuckles turned white. This was the exact moment. The point of no return. My son is unavailable, Walter said quickly, the lie rolling off his tongue with sickening ease. He had a massive mental break. He is currently in police custody abroad. My wife and I have full emergency powers over his estate. I see, Marcus said smoothly. Standard procedure in these complex cases requires a formal affidavit of sole authority. You and your wife will need to sign a sworn, notarized statement confirming his severe mental incapacity and your exclusive, legal right to pledge the funds. Be advised, this document carries the full weight of a federal court order. Can you execute that document today? Yes, Walter said. There was absolutely no hesitation, no guilt, no fatherly concern for a son supposedly locked in a foreign mental ward. Just pure, unadulterated greed. We can sign it immediately. Good. Meet me at our satellite office in Midtown Manhattan in exactly 2 hours. Bring all the paperwork. We will have the check ready. Marcus hung up the phone. The room fell completely silent. I stared at the red disconnect notification on the screen. My father hadn't just agreed to take out a sketchy loan. He had just eagerly agreed to commit a major federal felony just to steal my money. He didn't care if I was sick. He didn't care if I was rotting in a jail cell. He just desperately wanted the check. Sebastian slid a thick, dark folder across the table toward me. The affidavit is completely airtight, he said quietly. Once they put pen to paper, they are signing a full, unretractable confession. I took the expensive pen he offered. My hand was completely steady. Let's go, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't want to be late for my own funeral. The trap was fully set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was show up to watch the jaws snap shut on the people who thought they could destroy me. The Midtown Manhattan satellite office of Atlas Holdings was not just a room. It was an absolute masterpiece of psychological corporate theater, designed specifically to overwhelm and intimidate. Sebastian had spared absolutely no expense in setting up the perfect illusion to trap my greedy family. The walls were meticulously lined with dark, imported oak paneling that absorbed the ambient light, creating a heavy, serious atmosphere. The carpets were woven so incredibly thick that they seemed to swallow the sound of your footsteps entirely, making anyone who walked across them feel small and insignificant. In the dead center of the massive room sat a conference table carved from a single, flawless slab of imported Italian marble. It looked exactly like the kind of boardroom where ruthless billionaires casually dismantled smaller rival companies for absolute sport. The air inside the room smelled faintly of expensive leather, fresh dark roast espresso, and the undeniable, intoxicating scent of absolute power. I was standing perfectly still in the adjacent observation room, hidden flawlessly behind a large pane of specialized one-way mirror glass. The room I occupied was completely dark, save for the faint, clinical blue glow of the advanced security monitors displaying multiple high-definition camera angles of the conference room. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I felt completely detached from the situation, almost as if I were watching a high-stakes true crime documentary about complete strangers, rather than witnessing the absolute destruction of my own biological family. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open with a solid thud. Marcus Thorne walked in first, projecting the icy, unwavering demeanor of a man who held the fates of thousands of employees safely tucked inside his expensive leather briefcase. Following closely behind him were my parents, Walter and Sylvia. Trailing them, casually typing away on his smartphone, was my older brother Julian. I leaned closer to the cold glass, my eyes narrowing as I observed them. They absolutely did not look like concerned, terrified people whose youngest son was supposedly rotting in a foreign jail cell undergoing a severe mental breakdown. They looked positively radiant. They looked like lottery winners arriving to collect an oversized check. My mother, Sylvia, was wearing a brand new, clearly expensive designer coat that she absolutely could not afford on her maxed-out credit lines. To my absolute disgust, she was also wearing my late grandmother's vintage pearl necklace. It was the exact same grandmother whose massive inheritance they were currently plotting to steal through fraudulent means. My father walked into the room with a renewed, arrogant swagger. His shoulders were pulled back confidently, the heavy, crushing weight of his massive, violent gambling debts temporarily lifted by the glorious promise of an immediate, massive cash payout. He looked around the luxurious corporate office with hungry, intensely greedy eyes, visibly calculating how much wealth was concentrated in this single room. And then there was Julian, the golden child of the Miller family. He was wearing a sharply tailored suit that I knew for an absolute fact he had purchased using a high-limit credit card registered under my name 2 years ago. He was grinning widely, casually stopping to take a quick selfie in the reflection of the glass, completely oblivious to the terrifying fact that I was standing less than 3 feet away on the other side, watching his every single narcissistic move. "Please, have a seat," Marcus Thorne said, his deep voice carrying easily across the large room as he gestured to the plush leather chairs arranged neatly around the marble table. His tone was smooth, incredibly professional, and entirely devoid of any human warmth. My family practically scrambled to sit down, eager to please the powerful man who currently held the giant checkbook. Marcus deliberately took his time. He opened his leather briefcase with a satisfying click and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of dense legal documents, placing them squarely in the exact center of the table. He did not offer them water. He did not offer them coffee or pleasantries. He established the dominant power dynamic immediately and ruthlessly. "Before we proceed with the official transfer of funds this afternoon," Marcus began, folding his hands together precisely on the table, "I need to ensure absolute legal clarity regarding the proposed collateral. Atlas Holdings is fully prepared to liquidate your entire portfolio of bad debt today. We have drafted a comprehensive buyout agreement that covers all 3 of your currently defaulted mortgages, your outstanding high-interest personal loans, and the assorted credit lines you have unfortunately maxed out. In exchange for clearing this massive ledger, we absolutely require the immediate assignment of the Miller Family Trust as our primary collateral." Walter nodded eagerly, practically salivating at the thought of wiping his slate clean without having to do a single day of honest work. "Yes, exactly. The trust fund. $2.5 million. It is more than enough to cover our current liabilities and leave a substantial surplus." "Indeed it is," Marcus replied smoothly, his face an unreadable mask. "However, as we discussed on our preliminary telephone call, the trust is currently officially registered under the name of Ethan Miller. For Atlas Holdings to legally assume control of this specific asset, we must rigorously verify that you possess the absolute legal right to pledge it. The heavy document resting directly in front of you is a binding federal affidavit. By signing it, you are officially swearing under severe penalty of perjury that Ethan Miller is currently severely mentally incapacitated, currently incarcerated abroad, and entirely incapable of managing his own legal and financial affairs, thereby legally activating your emergency guardianship powers as next of kin. My mother, Sylvia, reached out and gently touched the thick document. She did not even flinch at the terrifying legal language. "He is," she said smoothly, her voice suddenly dripping with a sickeningly fake maternal sorrow. "My poor, sweet son suffered a devastating psychological break at the airport in Paris just days ago. He became violently erratic, unpredictable. The French authorities had absolutely no choice but to detain him for the safety of others. It completely breaks a mother's heart, but we must protect his financial assets from his own destructive behavior until he can be properly medicated." I gripped the edge of the security console in the observation room so hard my knuckles turned completely white. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her lies. The seamless, practiced ease with which she delivered that massive fabrication to a corporate attorney was genuinely chilling. She had clearly rehearsed this exact speech. She had probably practiced her sad, highly concerned mother routine in the bathroom mirror that very morning to ensure the performance was flawless. "I require significantly more than verbal assurances, Mrs. Miller," Marcus stated flatly, pushing a heavy, silver Mont Blanc pen across the smooth marble table toward her. "This specific federal affidavit requires both of your legal signatures, and it must be officially notarized on the premises. The gentleman standing quietly by the door is a court-appointed notary public. He will closely witness the execution of this document. I must remind you, because absolute compliance is paramount to Atlas Holdings, that intentionally signing a false affidavit to secure a financial loan constitutes severe wire fraud, bank fraud, and federal perjury. Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed with this transaction?" Marcus gave them one final, incredibly clear chance. One massively glaring, legally mandated exit ramp. If they had even a single ounce of human conscience, if they possessed even a microscopic shred of genuine parental love left for me, this was the exact moment they would stop everything. This was the moment they would look at the terrifying federal warning printed on that paper, realize the truly monstrous crime they were committing against their own flesh and blood, and walk away from the table. I watched my father pick up the silver pen. He did not hesitate for even a fraction of a second. He did not look at my mother for confirmation or reassurance. He just pulled the heavy document toward him, flipped directly past the warnings to the signature page, and signed his name with a rapid, violent scrawl. "There," Walter said, pushing the paper toward my mother with a satisfied sigh. "Done. Now about the wire transfer. How quickly can the funds actually hit my checking account? I have some very pressing deadlines with certain individuals who do not like to wait." My mother picked up the pen next. She signed her name with elegant, sweeping loops, looking incredibly pleased with herself. "We just want to put this entire ugly chapter behind us and focus on healing," she added, handing the pen directly to Julian. Julian, who technically had absolutely no legal standing regarding the trust but was heavily required by Marcus to sign as a direct witness to their guardianship claim, eagerly scribbled his name. "Yeah, my little brother is a complete mess. Honestly, he always has been. He cracks under the slightest pressure. This is genuinely for his own good. He absolutely does not know how to handle real money anyway. He would just waste it." They laughed. My family actually sat in that beautiful, high-end corporate office and laughed together while they casually, brutally signed away my entire life, my reputation, and my future. The notary stepped forward from the shadows, silently stamping the heavy document and formally signing his own name, permanently making it an official, binding legal instrument. Marcus Thorne picked up the signed affidavit, carefully reviewing the wet ink to ensure every line was filled correctly. He closed the thick file with a loud snap and placed it safely inside his leather briefcase. The trap had officially, irrevocably snapped shut. "Excellent," Marcus said, standing up to his full height. "The legal documentation is now perfectly in order. Now, I believe you are fully ready to meet the principal director of Atlas Holdings to finalize the disbursement of your funds." Walter frowned slightly, looking suddenly confused. "The principal director? I thought you were handling the entire transaction, Mr. Thorne. You said you had the authority." I am merely the legal counsel for this firm, Marcus replied, a faint, highly dangerous smile finally appearing on his stoic face. The true owner of the capital heavily prefers to look his clients directly in the eye before closing a deal of this magnitude. Marcus reached down and pressed a small, hidden button under the conference table. That was my cue. I turned away from the one-way glass and walked purposefully toward the heavy oak doors of the conference room. I was wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that Sebastian had generously provided for me. My shoes were polished to a flawless mirror shine. My posture was incredibly straight, completely commanding, and entirely free of the crushing, suffocating weight of their lifelong expectations. I was no longer the reliable, pathetic safety net they had abused for decades. I was the executioner, and it was time for the final act. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped boldly into the room. The heavy oak doors closed behind me with an incredibly loud, definitive click. The sound echoed sharply in the massive, otherwise silent conference room. For a solid 3 seconds, absolutely nobody moved a single muscle. My family just sat there and stared at me, their brains completely short-circuiting, desperately trying to process the physically impossible image standing right in front of them. My father's jaw literally dropped wide open. The healthy, confident color completely drained from his face in an instant, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost who had just seen his own grave. My mother's hand flew up violently to clutch the vintage pearl necklace tightly at her throat, her eyes widening to the size of saucers with sheer, unadulterated horror. Julian, who was halfway through typing another fake, attention-seeking sympathy post on his phone, froze completely, his thumb hovering uselessly over the glowing screen. "Hello, Walter. Hello, Sylvia," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy, suffocating silence like a freshly sharpened razor blade. I intentionally did not call them Mom and Dad. I officially lost those parents the exact moment they purposefully left me stranded at Charles de Gaulle Airport with a stolen identity. "Julian, I see you bought a brand new suit. I sincerely hope you kept the receipt, because you are going to need the refund for commissary money." "Ethan?" my mother finally gasped, her voice trembling violently as she tried to form words. She gripped the sharp edge of the marble table to physically steady herself. "How? What on earth are you doing here? You are supposed to be in Paris. You are supposed to be locked in a hospital getting help. In a dirty French holding cell, actually." I corrected her smoothly, walking slowly and deliberately toward the head of the long table. "Because somebody mysteriously slipped a reported stolen passport directly into my bag right before the security checkpoint. A truly fascinating turn of events, do you not think?" Walter stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly and aggressively against the expensive carpet. He was breathing heavily, deep panic setting in as his limited brain tried to find an escape route. "This is a massive mistake. Mr. Thorne, what exactly is going on here? Why is my son suddenly in your office? We came here in good faith to finalize a bridge loan with Atlas Holdings." Marcus Thorne casually leaned back against the dark wood paneling of the wall, calmly crossing his arms over his chest. He looked highly entertained by the unfolding chaos. "You are indeed finalizing a loan, Mr. Miller. I told you very clearly that the principal director of Atlas Holdings wanted to look you directly in the eye before handing over the money. Allow me to formally introduce my highly esteemed client, Ethan Miller, the sole proprietor, founder, and majority shareholder of Atlas Holdings." The absolute, deafening silence that rapidly followed that single statement was the most beautiful, satisfying music I had ever heard in my entire 29 years of life. My parents looked frantically back and forth between me and Marcus Thorne, the terrifying, crushing reality of the situation slowly breaking them like a physical weight. They had not just walked into a high-end corporate office seeking a bailout. They had walked directly into my carefully constructed slaughterhouse, completely of their own free will. "You haven't signed the paperwork yet?" I noted casually, picking up the heavy silver pen from the marble table and twirling it in my fingers. "Oh wait, my mistake. You absolutely did." I leaned forward, placing both of my hands firmly on the table, and looked directly into my father's deeply terrified eyes. "You were about to casually commit perjury to steal from your own son," I said calmly, stating it not as a wild accusation, but as an undeniable, heavily documented fact. "You just eagerly signed a sworn, notarized federal document formally stating I was severely mentally incapacitated. You legally claimed the rights to my $2.5 million trust fund strictly to pay off your dirty gambling debts to loan sharks. That specific crime carries a mandatory 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. I strongly dare you to deny what you just did." He froze completely. He couldn't speak a single word. The trap had sprung so perfectly, so violently, that it knocked the breath entirely out of his lungs. Then Julian stepped forward. He always genuinely thought he was the smartest, most capable person in any room. He always thought he could smoothly manipulate his way out of any consequence because our parents had always shielded him. He suddenly smiled, a nasty, highly desperate smirk spreading across his face, and he aggressively held up a sleek black smartphone. It was my phone, the exact phone they had stolen from me at the airport to ensure I couldn't call for help. "You really think you are so smart, Ethan?" Julian sneered, his voice dripping with venom and misplaced confidence. "You think you trapped us in this fancy room? While you were busy flying back here playing corporate CEO, I accessed your accounting firm's highly secure server through your stolen phone. I downloaded every single one of your top clients' highly sensitive financial files. Everything. The offshore accounts, the aggressive tax strategies, the massive real estate portfolios." Julian took a highly aggressive step toward me, brandishing the phone like a loaded weapon. "An automated email to the National Ethics Board and to your firm's managing partners goes out in exactly 10 minutes. You will absolutely lose your license. You will lose your very lucrative job. You will face massive, career-ending corporate lawsuits for severely breaching client confidentiality. Your entire career will be permanently over before lunchtime. So here is the new deal, little brother. You physically rip up that signed affidavit right now, you willingly hand over the trust fund access to us, or I press send and destroy your entire life. Choose." He actually thought he had me cornered. He genuinely thought he had found the perfect, unbreakable leverage to force me back into submission. I didn't panic. I didn't flinch. I didn't even raise my voice. I just calmly reached into my suit jacket pocket and pulled out my newly purchased phone. With a single, deliberate tap on the screen, the massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the conference room wall suddenly flared to blinding life. The large screen displayed a highly complex web of security logs, precise GPS locations, raw IP addresses, and exact, unalterable timestamps. "That passcode on my phone wasn't a careless mistake, Julian," I said softly, watching his arrogant smile begin to rapidly waver. "It was carefully placed bait." I pointed directly to the glowing red data flashing on the screen. "You see, my stolen phone was officially logged into French police custody at the exact moment the server breach occurred. I have the official translated police reports and the international tracking data to definitively prove it. You didn't just hack a private company server to find some dirty secrets. You actively used a stolen device to commit massive international cyber fraud across state and national borders." Julian's face completely collapsed. The color rapidly drained from his cheeks as the horrifying reality of his profound, staggering stupidity finally caught up with him. "My firm's servers are heavily monitored by top-tier security," I continued relentlessly, ensuring he understood the magnitude of his failure. "The exact moment you initiated that unauthorized download, you triggered an automatic, silent alert directly to the FBI Cybercrimes Division. You practically handed them your exact IP address and your physical location in Manhattan on a shiny silver platter." The quiet man who had been standing patiently by the door, the notary who had formally stamped their documents, suddenly stepped forward and pulled a heavy gold badge from his inside suit pocket. "I am Special Agent Harris with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced, his voice booming with undeniable authority. "I am a court-appointed notary and a mandatory federal fraud reporter. That signature you eagerly placed on that document makes this a clear-cut case of federal perjury and severe wire fraud. Sebastian Vance, who had been thoroughly enjoying watching the entire scene through the security cameras, casually strolled into the room through a discreet side door. He checked his expensive watch again, looking perfectly bored with their pathetic display. The local detectives and federal agents have been actively listening in the next room for the past 20 minutes. I believe we have absolutely everything we need to put them away for a very long time. Right on his cue, the heavy oak doors burst open again. Two fully uniformed NYPD officers and two plainclothes federal agents strode aggressively into the room, their expressions grim and highly determined. Julian dropped my stolen phone onto the marble table as if it had suddenly caught fire. He backed away rapidly, his hands raised high in the air in immediate surrender. My father collapsed back heavily into his leather chair, tightly holding his chest, audibly gasping for air as his world ended. My mother began to hyperventilate wildly, tears completely ruining her expensive makeup as she realized there was no manipulating her way out of federal cuffs. "You wanted my hard-earned career or my grandmother's inheritance?" I said quietly, leaning down to look my brother directly in his terrified, panicked eyes. "You lose both. You lose everything. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey." The sharp, metallic sound of steel handcuffs clicking tightly around my father's wrists was the absolute loudest noise in the entire room. There was no chaotic shouting, no dramatic physical fight, no grand speeches of defiance. Just the brutal, heavy, undeniable consequences of their own incredibly greedy actions finally crashing down upon them with the force of a freight train. The federal agents systematically read them their Miranda rights, their voices devoid of any emotion. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words, usually heard only safely through television screens from the comfort of a living room couch, echoed loudly off the expensive wood paneling, making the horrifying situation terrifyingly real for the Miller family. My mother, Sylvia, suddenly broke away from the strong grip of the officer holding her right arm. She lunged frantically toward me, her face a horrific mask of desperate, pathetic panic. She fell heavily to her knees right in front of me, aggressively grabbing the expensive fabric of my tailored trousers. "Ethan, please!" she sobbed violently, completely abandoning her sophisticated, controlled facade. "Please, you absolutely cannot do this. We are your parents. We gave you life. You know your father is very sick. His gambling is a terrible illness. He didn't truly mean to hurt you. Julian made a stupid mistake because he was stressed. Please, tell these officers it was just a big family misunderstanding. We are family. You fix things, Ethan. Fix this." I looked down at the weeping woman who had intentionally, coldly abandoned me in a foreign country without a single second thought. I looked closely at the very woman who had ruthlessly written a formal email claiming I was severely mentally insane just to legally steal my grandmother's money and ruin my career. I gently but incredibly firmly pried her trembling hands off my clothes. I took a deliberate, highly visible step back, establishing an absolute, unbreakable physical and emotional boundary between us. "You aren't my family," I said, my voice completely steady, calm, and devastatingly cold. "You are just highly toxic people I unfortunately share DNA with. Real family doesn't intentionally leave you stranded in Europe to face armed police. Real family doesn't try to systematically destroy your entire career to conveniently pay off violent loan sharks. You made your incredibly selfish choices, Sylvia. Now you finally get to live with the heavy consequences." The officer pulled her roughly to her feet and actively led her toward the door. She was wailing now, a high-pitched, terrible, grating sound of pure defeat, but I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no sorrow, no lingering regret. The deeply infected emotional cord had been cut permanently and cauterized. Julian was escorted out next. As the burly federal agent marched him directly past me, he didn't apologize. He didn't beg for mercy or try to explain his actions. He just glared intensely at me with pure, unadulterated hatred burning in his eyes. He was finally being held legally accountable for the very first time in his excessively pampered, highly entitled life, and he utterly despised me for forcing him to face reality. After they were officially escorted out of the building to the waiting police cruisers parked on the busy Manhattan street below, the luxurious room fell silent once again. Marcus Thorne began methodically packing up his briefcase, nodding at me with a look of deep professional respect. Sebastian walked over to a hidden bar cabinet, poured 2 generous glasses of aged, incredibly expensive scotch and handed one directly to me. "Well played, Ethan," Sebastian said smoothly, raising his crystal glass in a quiet, respectful toast. "Clean, brutally efficient, and utterly devastating to the targets." "It's not completely over just yet," I replied, taking a slow, burning sip of the premium liquid. "There are still some highly toxic loose ends that urgently need to be tied up before I can truly rest." I set my glass down firmly on the marble table, pulled out my new phone, and actively dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang exactly 3 times before she answered. "Hello, this is Chloe." The familiar voice of the trust fund director came through the line, sounding perfectly professional, highly pleasant, and entirely clueless about the bloodbath that had just occurred. "Hello, Chloe. It is Ethan Miller," I said, leaning casually against the window. There was a massive, sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Ethan? Oh my goodness. I am so incredibly glad to hear your voice. Your mother told me the most terrible things. She aggressively sent me international police reports." "Save the performance, Chloe," I interrupted sharply, cutting cleanly through her desperate, pathetic lies. "I know absolutely everything. I know for a fact you were the exact person who tipped my mother off about the 48-hour absentee clause. I know you deliberately and illegally advised her on how to formally file the emergency guardianship paperwork to bypass the standard legal waiting period. And I know precisely that you expected a massive, illegal kickback from my family for pushing the wire transfer through without performing the required proper verification." "Ethan, I absolutely do not know what you are talking about. I was just following standard fiduciary protocol for absentee clients." Her voice was shaking violently now. The professional veneer had completely cracked. She knew she was caught dead to rights. "My legal and tech team at Atlas Holdings has already successfully mirrored your private emails and hidden financial communications," I stated coldly, dropping the hammer. "We have the explicit, undeniable digital proof of your direct collusion to commit massive financial fraud against your own highly protected client. By tomorrow morning, the federal authorities will have a signed warrant for your immediate arrest, and the National Ethics Board will permanently, irrevocably strip you of your fiduciary license. You are going to lose absolutely everything, Chloe. Have a pleasant evening." I hung up the phone instantly, purposely not waiting for her hysterical response or inevitable begging. Next, I confidently dialed Aunt Martha, the sweet, highly manipulative woman who had always actively shamed me into giving up my hard-earned resources for the supposed good of the family. She answered cheerfully, completely unaware of the massive bomb that had just absolutely obliterated her brother's life. "Ethan, sweetie, where are you? We have been so worried," she chirped falsely. "I'm in New York, Martha," I said flatly, refusing to use her familial title. "I just wanted to call and let you officially know that Walter, Sylvia, and Julian have just been aggressively arrested by the FBI for federal perjury, severe wire fraud, and international cybercrimes." A stunned, totally deafening silence followed. "Arrested? What? Ethan, what on earth did you do?" she shrieked, her true nature instantly surfacing as she immediately blamed me for their crimes. "I didn't do anything but step back and let them eagerly dig their own massive graves," I replied calmly. "But I'm calling to give you a very fair warning. I know you were the one who originally introduced my father to the violent loan sharks. I know you have been quietly taking a 10% cut of the money they forcefully extorted from me over the years as a finder's fee. When the federal prosecutors start offering highly aggressive plea deals tomorrow, who exactly do you think my desperate parents are going to give up first to reduce their own lengthy prison sentences? I could practically hear the blood rushing completely out of her head through the phone speaker. They will sell you out in a heartbeat, Martha, just exactly like they gleefully tried to sell me out. I strongly suggest you hire a very good, very expensive criminal defense attorney. You are absolutely going to need one. I ended the call right then and there. I permanently blocked her number. I systematically went through my phone and completely erased their contacts, their emails, their photos, and their entire toxic existence from my digital life. I was finally, truly, and completely done cleaning up the poisonous weeds in my garden. 3 months later, the massive, bustling city of New York was beautifully wrapped in a crisp, bright, highly energetic autumn afternoon. I stood confidently in my brand new, incredibly spacious corner office located deep in the heart of the financial district. I casually held a cup of artisan coffee, looking out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling, magnificent New York skyline. The prominent name, Ethan Miller, senior partner, was deeply etched in elegant, frosted glass on the heavy mahogany door directly behind me. After the spectacular, highly publicized fallout with my deeply toxic family, Sebastian and I officially, legally dissolved our temporary consulting contract just as we had agreed. There was absolutely no drama, no lingering emotional obligations, just deep, profound mutual respect between two competent men who thoroughly understood the massive value of ruthless efficiency. He immediately offered me a permanent, highly lucrative executive position at his venture capital firm, specifically managing complex risk assessment and forensic auditing for his absolute largest corporate acquisitions. I accepted without hesitation. Plus one, I was currently making more than 3 times my previous highest salary. I possessed total, absolute financial and emotional independence, and for the very first time in 29 years, I slept incredibly soundly through the entire night without the crushing, suffocating anxiety of violently wondering what massive family disaster I would be forced to fix the next morning. The subsequent legal proceedings regarding my family were entirely predictable, yet profoundly, deeply pathetic to observe from a distance. I strictly did not attend the initial court hearings. I absolutely refused to let their desperate, highly emotional legal theater disrupt the profound peace of my new life. But Marcus Thorne, who was aggressively handling the massive civil lawsuit against them to recover the extensive legal fees they had selfishly cost me, kept me thoroughly, meticulously updated on every single development. The criminal trial was a complete masterclass in toxic familial destruction. When faced with the highly terrifying reality of serving hard time in a federal prison, the supposedly loving family completely imploded upon itself. Julian, the highly beloved golden child, the precious son who could supposedly do absolutely no wrong, immediately took a massive, aggressive plea deal from the prosecutor. He aggressively, viciously threw our parents directly under the speeding bus, testifying loudly under oath that Walter and Sylvia had entirely masterminded the entire fraudulent plot from the very beginning. He desperately claimed he was deeply emotionally manipulated and physically forced to plant the stolen passport under severe, terrifying duress. He claimed he was just an innocent, traumatized victim of their incredibly bad, highly abusive parenting. My parents were utterly, comprehensively destroyed, not by the harsh federal sentencing they eventually received, but by the ultimate, crushing, absolutely devastating betrayal of the one son they had foolishly worshipped and sacrificed my entire life for. The final, true punishment wasn't the cold, hard steel bars of a tiny prison cell. It was the horrifying, undeniable realization that they had carefully raised a ruthless monster who was just as profoundly selfish, greedy, and devoid of loyalty as they were. They officially received 7 hard years in a federal penitentiary for massive wire fraud, conspiracy, and severe perjury. Julian managed to aggressively negotiate his own sentence down to 3 years in a minimum security facility, plus a permanent, lifetime ban from ever holding any corporate fiduciary position again. Chloe completely lost her prestigious career and faced incredibly severe fines, utterly bankrupted by the massive legal fallout of her greed. Aunt Martha was currently under intense, unforgiving IRS investigation for years of undeclared, illicit income, and was facing her own massive legal battles. The absolute day after the final sentencing was handed down by the judge, the highly anticipated $2.5 million trust fund was officially, cleanly dispersed directly into my heavily secured private accounts. There were no more administrative delays, no more hidden absentee clauses, no more manipulative, toxic guardians trying to illegally steal my secure future. I sat down heavily at my massive mahogany desk and smoothly signed the final legal document confirming the complete transfer. I looked closely at the enormous, life-changing number glowing brightly on the computer screen. It wasn't just cash. It was absolute security. It was the absolute, undeniable validation of my late grandmother's true, loving intentions for me. She had always quietly known what they were truly capable of doing, and she had tried her absolute best to financially protect me from their unending greed. I closed the laptop securely, packed my expensive leather briefcase, and left the office early. I took a sleek black town car directly to JFK Airport. I easily bypassed the massive standard security lines and walked straight into the exclusive, highly quiet first-class lounge. I handed the smiling gate agent my real, highly valid passport and a first-class ticket. I was flying back to Paris. I desperately needed to finally finish the peaceful European vacation that had been so violently and aggressively interrupted. But more importantly, I needed to physically return to the exact geographic place where my spirit had been temporarily broken, strictly to definitively prove to myself that the deep trauma no longer held a single ounce of power over my life or my emotions. When I finally landed smoothly at Charles de Gaulle, I walked right past the exact, busy gate where my mother had coldly abandoned me. I looked directly at the exact spot on the floor where Julian had aggressively shoved me to plant the fake passport. I felt the phantom, terrifying weight of the metal handcuffs on my wrists for a brief, fleeting microsecond. But then, I took a massive, deep breath of the cool, incredibly refreshing European air. I walked confidently out of the noisy terminal, hailed a local taxi, and headed directly toward the beautiful, historic heart of the city, completely and utterly unburdened. They strictly told me that family is absolutely everything. They were completely wrong. Family is not defined by shared biology. Family is strictly defined by the people who consistently treat you with genuine respect, who fiercely protect your mental peace, and who loudly celebrate your success instead of actively, jealously plotting to steal it. Sometimes, the absolute most powerful and truly necessary thing you can ever do for your own survival is to permanently stop trying to fix the toxic people who are intentionally breaking you, and just confidently let them fall entirely into the exact traps they aggressively set for you. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own highly toxic family? Have you ever had to fiercely draw a hard, absolutely unforgiving line to firmly protect your own sanity, your hard-earned money, and your future? Share your personal story in the comments below, and please don't forget to casually hit like and strongly subscribe so you absolutely don't miss the next amazing journey. Remember, confidently walking away from deep toxicity is absolutely not a failure. It is the ultimate massive victory. Stay incredibly strong, aggressively know your massive worth, and absolutely never apologize for fiercely protecting your own peace.